welcome to another edition of the Messaging Maven. This time, and for the first time, luckily, we are having a guest on this event as well. This time, joined by the Honorable Mr. James Williams from the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. James, how are you?
I am very well, Uku, and thank you very much. It's a real honor to be the first guest on your Messaging Maven show, because it's a show. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yes.
And thank you. A real honor.
Exactly. I mean, it's a kind of a habit for us because you were the first person to do the On the Comms series on LinkedIn as well when we did those back in the day. So you're kind of my go-to for the first guest.
That's fine.
So today's topic is the question of trust. We've been talking quite a lot about, and most of what we present outward has revolved around trust over the past 6 months to a year, talking about fraud and scam and AIT and educating the market into not just the perspective of what happens, but from the perspective of price, how to trust price, how to understand those things. And MEF luckily does a lot of heavy lifting in understanding what consumers are currently looking at, what is their understanding, what are they trusting, what are they not trusting, what are their behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. So today we get to look at the trust report and the trust study that MEF did. Tell us a little bit more about it, James. What is it? How does it work? And some of the highlights.
Sure, no problem. So some of you watching this won't be familiar with MEF. So first of all, MEF is the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. We've been around over 20 years. We are a neutral, not-for-profit body. We are member-led. So by that, we have board directors, and our board directors, guess what? They're elected by the other members, and they're members. So members choose the direction of MEF, and it's up to myself and my colleagues to move forward in the direction the members want. So members such as Messente, which is led by Uku here. And we have a very, very active messaging group. It's called the Future of Messaging program. And within that, we have member meetings, which are closed door member only meetings. And those working groups, those member meetings, the members affect real change. So members do that, and we come out with some great insights, which aren't created by members, but MEF itself for many years has been known for the content it creates. And every year we carry out our own consumer research. It used to be 10 countries, 650 smartphone users in each of those countries around the world. For the first time this year, we upped that to 13 countries. So if you're good at maths and you're 650 times table, that's 8,450 real people like you and I, smartphone users of various demographics. And whether you're a heavy user or a light user as well, that was taken into account in the research. They were surveyed on a variety of topics. And our headline report is our consumer trust report. So if you go to the Mobile Ecosystem Forum website, you look at the insights section and reports, you will see the report there. MEF members can download the report in full. It's got fantastic insights. And that is what we're talking about today, the insights coming from that report. But remember, it's about real consumers, you and I. And that's a bit different from a lot of the research out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, what went into making the report and doing so for the past multiple years? And how did you get from 10 to 13 markets, and why those markets? What was the spread? What was the decision for the spread?
Yeah, no problem. So the recent increase were actually specific requests from our members. Could we add specific countries such as Italy to the mix? Mm-hmm. So members asked for this and we reacted. Of course, adding those countries has a cost to that. We're not for profit, but the insight side of things is very important. Carrying out the research is not easy. We couldn't do that ourselves because MEF is actually a very, very small organization. We might appear big to the outside world in terms of the large number of events we have, whether they be in person, online, or a hybrid. But the reality is we're a small team. So we go to an external expert research company. We provide all the questions and they go and carry out the research. So it's a large financial investment, but it's something members have found so valuable over all the years we've been doing it. As I said, it's the 9th year we've been doing this. And spinning off from the consumer trust report, we have other reports into the area, for example, of A2P messaging, so application to person, business to consumer, business to business messaging. That report will be coming out very soon. payments, and indeed other reports as well. So this research done with real consumers is the central pillar of the insights that come out from MEF directly through the year.
Good, awesome. And I especially like the fact that this is a long running survey, so you can also understand trends, see how things are
Correct.
evolving or devolving as well, not just getting better, but also potentially getting worse, right? So, without further ado, what's the top line? Is trust declining? Does trust going up? What do you see?
2 words. I'm sorry to say it, but it depends. It depends where you are, Uku. So, and again, the definition of trust. What is trust? It's a really, really tough thing to define. And it's so bound by culture, but ultimately it's bound by the individual. Something you personally might question and find potentially untrustworthy. Let's talk about spam. You might view something as unsolicited or spammy. I might not. And that's down to an individual, but it's also down to the culture, the country, etc., where you are. So we can't talk I wouldn't talk in general, but the spread of 13 countries covered, ranging, for example, we've got Japan, we have Germany, we have the USA and Canada in there as well, and Brazil and Mexico. So and South Africa, we're covering a large part of the world. So we do get a picture building up. And the picture building up is that actually there is still a big problem with trust out there for subscribers. Now, there's a huge amount of work being done by organizations such as yourself. You personally do a great job of educating the market, and affecting real change cannot come overnight. And it cannot just come from one party. We have 216 members. 2/3 of those are active in business messaging. So that's about 160 of our members are ultimately here because of business messaging, and it's that insight area, the future messaging program. But MEF alone cannot affect real change, and therefore our partnerships with the likes of the GSMA, the i3 Forum, the Global Solutions Council, the Global Leadership Forum linked to ITW, and many other organizations are critical to affecting real change. So no matter what has been done in the industry to protect consumers, the key thing we've got to understand is that the market has grown. So if we're talking about messaging, the messaging market has grown, and that really comes off the back of payments, with so many more transactions taking place online. Estonia is a perfect example of this. So I know your country, you're really leading the charge and moving towards a cashless society. That means, by natural extension of that more stuff is being done online, and people are really understanding the technology. But to do that, you've got to have trust. And there's some interesting findings, and you actually see there's one headline slide on the report, which for me is highly impactful, which has Mexico at the top as the population who view the market with the most trust. And at the bottom, you actually have Japan, and just above them, Germany. And people think, okay, Japan and Germany, but there's one thing both of them have in common, and that is in Asia, or actually for the world, Japan is the country which is holding on to cash the longest and the most. Of course, they have digital payments. They're constantly voted the top 2, 3 countries in the world in terms of technological advancement and things like that. But they're also very, very traditional. Children from a very young age are used to receiving gifts in red envelopes, and it's cash. When people get married, they receive cash as the gifts. So cash is embedded within the culture and the psyche. And indeed in Germany, and although Switzerland wasn't surveyed, I've spent a lot of time in Switzerland myself, and it still blows my mind that people pull 1,000 Swiss franc notes out of their wallets. That's $1,100 banknotes out of their wallets, and just pay for their weekly groceries with that, rather than tapping and paying with mobile wallets or a credit card or a debit card. And it still happens. So it varies so greatly. But unfortunately, trust is an issue. That's the headline takeaway. There is a lack of trust out there in many, many countries and regions. And unfortunately, dare I say it, for good reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we just had a conversation with a major logistics provider in Estonia as well, talking specifically about trust and about the fact that when trust in a specific channel degrades, what they get to is this situation where you take, parcel locker notifications. You have a parcel, go pick it up type of a thing, right? And because people are used to getting one of the most common types of scam in messaging is related to logistics, because you have a parcel, you haven't paid customs, whatever type of, it's very inviting and very easy to trigger. And most often, we might forget that I ordered something 2 weeks ago and it has arrived, for example. So very common form of that. And because of that, because of those reasons, we end up in these situations where people don't trust the initial notification. So they have to resend the text message. And every time they have to actually resend that text message, it's of course additional expense to the business, but it's also additional expense for logistics providers specifically because the parcel locker is still occupied. The speed of transaction, the speed of how well things are working for you also degrades. And then if you think it even a little bit further, it also degrades the user experience, because now, they're less trusting of the user experience themselves. Is this communication valid? Is this not valid? Am I getting my package? When am I getting my package? And this snowballs into what we've seen so many times. When people get hit with some form of scam, they're going to be pissed off usually at two different companies. One, the one whose name is associated with that scam, even though they might have nothing to do with it. And second, the place where they made their order from. So there's multiple parties being in a position of having to sort of trust in their brand being degraded by these various practices as well, which of course means that businesses need to spend more money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which degrades it even more, etc. So it's a long-standing question of understanding. Okay, so where are we transitioning currently? What's the future ecosystem looking like? Are we working more on trust? And this brings me back to one of the main points you brought out, is that no organization on their own can really have a major impact. I mean, unless you control 100% of the market, then maybe you can. But then you're still a small cog in that entire global world that we live in, right? Even if you control a market. But realistically, in order to have meaningful change, you need to work with, the authorities, the operators, the brands, the associations of different brands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then quite often, a lot of businesses, and somewhat rightfully, ask, but why? Why am I putting this much time and effort into this? Where's my commercial angle? We've heard this before. We've heard that, last time we were in Stockholm, we heard the same question. So what's the commercial angle of this? How are we going to benefit from this if we put so much time and effort into doing this? But for me, I keep on thinking about the fact that, it's the long game. Are we here to sustain whatever channel we're talking about, be it, mobile payments, be it text messaging or any form of business messaging, be it, phone calls, be it any sort of type of communication or digital transaction, if you want to pull it even broader. If you want Japan to be a more digital, less cash-driven nation, then they need that trust. And if that is consistently being degraded more through more effective scams, AI use, et cetera, then we'll start being in trouble, not just from a personal business perspective, but from the perspective of what's the future of the channel. Where are we going with that?
Totally agree. The logistics angle you mentioned is super interesting because not all logistics companies are built equal. So MEF is the neutral arbiter, and we run the SMS sender ID registry in the UK, in Spain and Ireland. So we have many so-called merchants, brands signed up with us in the UK. So leading banks, we have the Royal Mail, which is the leading deliverer of letters and parcels here in the UK, as well as other brands. But on the logistics side of things, it's very interesting. And it's somewhat problematic because who are the clients of the logistics companies? They're not us, the subscribers that receive, the consumers that actually receive the parcels at our doors. We are not their customers. It's actually the brands wanting the parcel sent out that are the clients. So there are, unfortunately, large pockets of the logistics world who effectively have their heads buried in the sand, that this isn't their problem because it's not affecting our customers, but it is affecting their brand. And I'm always bemused, I think is a good word, by the fact that so many organizations are so worried about what one of their team members might say on social media. Oh, you can't say this, you can't say that. This is the party line. But there's no problem with having thousands of the end consumers receiving the parcels they deliver, having these, what we call smishing attacks, SMS phishing type attacks, where someone says that, yes, in order to get the parcel from the locker, or whatever it might be, you've got to spend an extra €2 because there wasn't enough postage paid, whatever it might be. These kind of scams. So it's a weird situation. And you would think today that all large brands would be all over this, wanting these types of scam to be shut down, working very closely with the messaging providers such as yourselves, with trade organizations such as MEF, who have that sender ID registry solution active, and it's been active for a number of years in the UK. Unfortunately, it's not always the case. So it's a strange one. And of course, it's not just logistics companies like that. The same holds for other players across the industry. And what we also see here at MEF is there are participants of our SMS Sender ID Registry program who actually don't want it known to the outside world. So their brand will never appear on the MEF website that they are part of the program, because their logic is that if it's known that they're part of this anti-fraud program, then there must be a fraud problem. But I think the average person on the street, whether it be in Estonia or here in the north of England, you go out on the streets, you ask people will be aware that fraud takes on many forms, and it is an issue. And surely the only way to protect consumers is to realize, yes, we have an issue, we've got to deal with it. But still many organizations don't approach things like that. So very strange.
It's also odd because a lot of times it seems that both businesses and consumers as well don't actually understand the magnitude of the issue. There was a 2020 EU study made specifically looking at what is the impact of all different types of fraud and how many people have actually been in some way, shape, or form affected by fraud, and then what is the average financial damage of fraud, for example. And it was quite shocking because of all of the respondents in a large amount of European countries, I think it was more than 40-ish, 58% of people had at least some form of interaction with some form of fraud.
Yeah.
Could remember. And 24% had lost something financially, be it €1 or be it 10 cents, up to multiple, thousands of euros lost. 24% of everybody had been affected by that. So, and then the average damage across that 24 was, I think it was 82 point something euros per person on average. So if you look at just an amount of scam that's sent out from a business messaging perspective, which we always look at things from, you take 100,000 messages, 24% conversion, so you're looking at 24,000 people converting with an €82 average. If you do the quick math, that's a lot of money from that. And quite often, the interesting thing is we see and we hear when the damage is substantial. But when the damage is minimal, when the damage is, €2, €3, €5, €10, people tend to not always take it somewhere because they're either embarrassed by the fact that they got, scammed by €5 or they clicked the link and, sent €2 somewhere that they should not have. So a lot of people actually keep silent about this aspect. And rather, it is then found out when those trust studies are done. And then you realize, but there's a trust issue. Well, where does the trust issue come from? Well, maybe half of those people have lost some money, but they've never reported it anywhere. Maybe they've never talked about the issues that they've shared or seen or their family has seen as well.
Okay, this remaining silent thing is so important. There's this perception out there when we're talking about all types of crime, whether we're talking about smishing, financial crime, physical crime, violent crime, robbery, whatever it might be around the world. There's this perception that in the modern era today, society is the most violent it's ever been. It's the most divided it's ever been and everything like that. But actually, you look back in history and you find it's not the case. But because the reality is that how do you know? Today, it's the only time in history that billions of us have been so connected. But then there comes another issue. Which source of information do you trust? And that leads directly into security, because there is an increasing amount of regulation coming into place. It's not just about the GDPR in the EU. You've got personal protection. You've got privacy, protection of personal information. So POPI Act in South Africa. You've got specific regulations in California and across so many different states. For example, in Utah, in the US, is bringing regulation that to use any form of social media, to even use Facebook, you've got to prove, and I mean prove, you're 18. So the regulation is so fragmented, and there's a real, I'm seeing personally as well, and what I'm seeing in research from talking to the MEF members, I've been at MEF probably getting on for 3 years and talking to so many members around the world, there's a real issue with individual attitudes to trust and information sharing, because in order for you and for other organizations to really stop fraud in their tracks, people have to be prepared to give up a little bit of information about themselves. So for example, mobile operators for me have so much information on us all. They know that, let's say you've been a subscriber of them for 4 years, you've paid your bill like a good chap regularly every month in full. So that just that nugget of information that this number has been there for 4 years, they've had the same number for 4 years, they've paid the bill 48 months successively, bang on time. Those two pieces of information, 4 years, 48 months, good payment, priceless, absolutely priceless. When it comes to financial services organizations wanting to know, can I trust Uku taking out this €1,000 hire purchase agreement for a television or whatever it might be? But how many mobile operators make this information available to people? Very, very few, because we can't do this because of GDPR. And actually, you could do it because it would be anonymized, and there are so many ways people can protect. So a lot of it comes down to education, which, as I mentioned, you are doing a great job of yourself, but it needs more than you. It needs more than me. It needs more than MEF. It needs the whole industry to educate people. Mobile operators, they effectively, in so many ways, own the keys to the subscribers as well. But we've got to be open. There are huge corporations, the so-called hyperscalers, who have billions of clients, whether it be chat apps like WhatsApp, global retail corporations such as Amazon, who have millions. Uber has hundreds of millions of clients around the world. Companies like that, they have a real role to play as well. And the only way they can really make that change is by stepping into organizations such as MEF, working with the GSMA, i3 Forum and others to affect that change with the messaging companies, with the mobile operators all together. So everyone has a role to play. And you cannot say it's the bank's fault, it's the mobile operator's fault. And also, I've got to say it, us subscribers, us individuals have a role to play. We cannot just blame everybody else for things. We've got to take care. We've got to pay a bit more attention to the content we receive. But I have to admit, I've been in the industry a long time, and I've never seen the high level, unfortunately, the high level of fraudulent content in terms of the language used, the calls to action, the trigger words. You have bad actors out there who have access to psychologists, psychiatrists, who are able to advise them on how best to press the buttons of people. And I'll never forget a session with Anea Adaptive Mobile with Simeon, who you know very well, and we'll be speaking together next week in London. And with him, and live at the event, he showed content. One of them was from a fraudster. One of them was from a genuine, well-known brand that practically all of you here watching and listening will know. And guess which one had the best written text and call to action? It was the fraudulent one. So it is tougher, admittedly, for individuals, particularly those who are not tech savvy, and it's easier to fall into that trap. And ultimately anyone can if they're tired, if they're not on their guard. But it has to be said, individuals do have a certain level of responsibility, and that cannot be devolved entirely to the government, the mobile operator, or the bank, for example.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I especially like the example about the quality of scam getting better. It's something I've been talking about a lot, even up to the point where, you know, there are marketing teams that should take notice on how effective they are in terms of compared to scammers, you know, with personalized URLs at one point in time. Like, that's the level of detail. But I especially like the fact that you brought out that this is a question of responsibility as well. And I think one of the things that was, I think it was brought out in Sweden as well, and this is something that has been brought out by our customers as well, that quite often businesses are more afraid of a false positive than they are of the repercussions of damage. Because, you know, a client of ours suffering from AI2, who've been working with and who have different safeguards in place, they pretty much straight up went and said that, you know, right now, implementing any other mechanism into our system would potentially degrade conversion rate of customers. And until AIT becomes an issue that costs us millions, up to millions per month, until that point in time, I don't care, because the conversion damage is still bigger. If you think of customer lifetime value and you're not, for example, getting 1% of your client's business due to false positives, and your customer lifetime value is in the hundreds, maybe even thousands, and you have tens of thousands of clients of coming in, you don't care. Just, you know, keep it, fine. You know, I'll have to pay 10,000 or 20,000 euros more on my invoice. I don't care, because the conversion is king. And it's just a question of, in the hunt of conversion, are you also damaging your brand in the long run? And then, of course, it's the question of, no business wants to take the responsibility of giving that false positive, right? Operators don't want to give false positives. Businesses, brands like us don't want to give false positives, because, you know, it's that fear that you're impacting a business's bottom line more by protecting them rather than not protecting them. And everybody puts the same position in place, right? So it's the question of, could we all agree to put in the best effort, right? And this is me being very, very sort of naive and blue-eyed in this situation, but like, is it okay to agree that we'll all try and not be responsible if things aren't perfect? But the assumption is that it needs to be perfect, that no false positives need to be there, that you have to make sure it's there. Even if you have, let's say, you build a verification service for calls. You know, there's plenty of those that you can download an app, and then you'll understand whether that call is legitimate or not. And then no one really wants to take responsibility if they give a false positive and your bank call doesn't go through, or your retailer doesn't get a hold of you, or your logistics company doesn't get a hold of you, and you don't get that package and it's reprocessed, and there's multiple, hundreds of euros of damage from purely one mistake as compared to how much you charged for that particular service, right? So it's this question of understanding, like, why are there so many actors backtracking and not wanting to put the work in and not trying to position themselves to work, cooperate, sharing as well. If I share something with a major competitor, it's always that fear of, how is this going to play out? Is this something they're going to use in their next, LinkedIn video against me? Or is this something that we can collaborate on? So there's a lot of mistrust within the industry between operators and aggregators who are simultaneously partners but competitors, between competitors themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole host of this simultaneously going on, with everybody kind of still fearing to make that decision. And the operator's example was perfect. GDPR is a very, very easy place to hide yourself behind, because you say,
Totally.
GDPR doesn't allow me to do that.
Correct. Totally
But
correct. So, yeah, 100%. And nobody has an excuse to not implement very robust authentication and verification solutions which minimize the false positives. I myself have been impacted by false positives twice, and I will never forget that. And I'm going to come out and say the brand because I've been a loyal customer of them for 23 years. I've had an American Express card since the year 2000. So I've been a loyal customer for 23 years, and generally across the board have received amazing service during that time. But a few years ago, I was in Australia on a private trip, and I thought, you know what, I'm so near, what the heck, I'm going to do it. So I booked a flight from Sydney to Auckland to go and visit Vodafone in New Zealand. I thought, I'm so near, let's do it. Why not? Take a little side trip for a couple of days and go and visit them. I was booking the flight, and Amex stopped the transaction. And what they said to me is, in an SMS, I had to call them. And I was in Australia, and this was a number of years ago. So I didn't have, WhatsApp wasn't around. They didn't have that to contact me. It was a good old voice call, which cost me a lot of money. So I had to call their contact center and prove it was myself. And there's me thinking, hang on a second, with the technology around, you could have done a lookup to establish that I was roaming in Australia. You could have a provider which can do, it's called an HLR lookup, a home location register lookup. It will see that I'm abroad. It will see I am roaming on the network, say the Optus network in Australia, on their visitor location register, and go, yeah, James is roaming in Australia. So therefore, it's highly likely this is a genuine transaction. He might not have been there before. He might not have done this, but there's no reason to stop that transaction in this day and age. There really isn't. But it comes down to this. Computer says, no, we can't do this because of the regulation side of things and that. And the mobile operators, I come back to this, but for me, the mobile operators have such a vast repository of information. It just isn't true. And I think personally, I call it the mobile subscriber intelligence market. I think mobile subscriber intelligence has the potential to be far, far bigger than anything we can think of in the world of business messaging. Far bigger, done right, because everything is moving online. Everything has been authenticated. And I read an article yesterday saying that credit vetting, that market alone is going to increase 70% within the next 5 years. So again, that information, Uka has been with the operator for 4 years. He's paid his bill meticulously for 48 months. Just those two bits of information, golden. Why don't all operators do that around the world? So there's a huge market here. And at the end of the day, it comes down to trust and relationships. And we've got a lot of work to do to bring that trust out from operators around the world and from other stakeholders. So our work is not done, Uku, that's for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with you as well. And I think that the more effort we put into sharing this communication channel, sharing the value, it's also a question of educating businesses to make the right decisions when they're communicating, not cutting corners, not, looking at this as like a commodity business and understanding that there's value in quality, there's value in going rich, because you just get a tick mark in the end. And that sometimes that might be enough to bulletproof your business for the next 3 years against new trends. So there's so much to do in terms of cooperation and information sharing and getting to a position where this business itself as a whole becomes more trustworthy, because the more digital we become and will inevitably be even more digital. So the question of digital trust will only become bigger and more sort of expansive throughout the next 10 years, 15 years, and we never know where it is going to go in that year's time as well. So trust is absolutely a key issue. Now, as per usual, you and me can go on about this, until the, crows go home. So whatever it is, we can be here for hours, but there are some questions already up for us as well. So I think that we might, leave our solo session for that second and actually get to some questions and share some thoughts from that as well. So let's see. Can you discuss the impact of industry certification and compliance standards on customer trust when selecting mobile services? You want to take this one first?
Yeah, I can. So MEF is the perfect place to discuss this. We have what's called the Business SMS Code of Conduct. It's the cornerstone of our Trust in Enterprise messaging scheme. Now, the world of business messaging and this is why I love it, and I've been in it for so many years, is very unlike any other industry I'm aware of, because even companies who are mortal competitors, mortal enemies of each other, frenemies, mortal enemies, whatever you want to call them, whatever status they may have with each other, they've got to work together. They actually have, because no one company, doesn't matter how big you are or the best relationships you have, has direct connectivity with all mobile network operators around the world. So it's a very strange industry to be in. But this means the trust game is even more important. Now, we've got this code of conduct, and that code actually says in it something, a topic you raised earlier, and that is we are doing the best we can. We are making maximum effort. We're not promising to be perfect. We're not promising that there won't be a spam message getting through, but we're doing everything we can to minimize the impact wherever possible. And that's the key thing. So we have this code of conduct in place. Around 50 companies, and I'm pleased to say including Messente, have signed up to it. And it is self-regulation. Now, self-regulation in itself is a topic. I find so many people say self-regulation, it's meaningless, because guess what? Anyone can regulate themselves and say, yes, I'm going to sign the code of conduct. Thank you very much. Practically, you would be 100% correct. However, the reality is, as soon as you sign something like the Business SMS Code of Conduct, and that's something actually that government departments in the UK require signature of in order to be considered to be in the process to actually be a deliverer of A2P SMS services to the British government. So they think it's valuable. It must be valuable somewhere along the way. But the key thing is, once you've signed that, you have all the eyes, in particular, of the other 50 or so signatories looking at you. And if you are doing something bad systematically, it's not about, oh, look, you sent 10 spam messages, or you sent 1,000, or you sent even 100,000, because the scale of some of these companies out there, the large MEF members, large messaging companies, they're dealing with billions of transactions a month. So it's about systematic. If someone is systematically setting out to defraud someone and carry out bad practices, that's when you can press the big button on the desk and actually report that member who has signed up to the code. This has been around for a number of years, and during that time, no one has pressed that big red button. So first of all, companies are very careful signing up, but I have to stress also, please do not think that companies who have not signed up to the code are all bad actors and are doing fraudulent things. It's far from the truth. There are a number of reasons for not signing up to the code. For example, it has so many pages, it has dozens of pages, and is the most detailed business SMS code out there on the planet. So when it comes to the legal side of things, particularly US-based corporations, it can be very difficult for large corporations in particular to sign up to it. So I don't want people thinking out there, if you go to the MEF website, look at self-regulation, look at the code of conduct, you can see who has signed up to it. Please don't think a company who has not signed up to it is bad. It's not the case. But those who have signed up to it have gone the extra step further. So yes, regulation is important. Self-regulation is valuable as well. And best practices are key. But no one can promise to be whiter than white and to be 100% pure in this market. We can only do the best we can.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it kind of falls into the same category if you have ISO standards. So one of the most common in IT, ISO 27001, right? A lot of companies will request that, see that as a sign of proof or an indicator of a certain level of seriousness within their business. But at the same time, it guarantees you nothing, because we've seen companies with ISO certificates get data breaches and security incidents happen to them regardless of having that ISO certificate for themselves. So I think it's the same thing with Business Code of Conduct and with any certification that you could possibly get as a business messaging company, for example, where it is a sign of effort rather than just a sign of, it'll be secure or it'll be the best. No, it's something that they care. It's an indication of values rather than just doing something else. Okay,
But
let's see
it's,
what else we have.
yeah, go on, let's go.
Yeah. Let's see what else. How do personalized experiences based on user data affect customer trust and their willingness to share information? I'll start off with this one. I mean, we
Go for it.
talked about personalization from the context of scam, but personalization has been a topic in user experience and in marketing for, I don't even remember how many years. Making it personalized, making it more matching person's values, person's interests is what, most of marketing that I see these days is generated around. How do we provide value for that specific person? And then scammers looking at the same thing going, how do I make sure that this scam is as personal and as triggered to that person as possible? Getting to the point where, we've seen instances where there is a transaction made in a web shop, small web shop, for example. And one of the logistics providers indicated that you have an incident in a small, or a purchase in a small web shop. And then 2 minutes later, an SMS scam is triggered against them. And no one knows how that information was obtained, but it's not random. The correlation is too strong between those two instances, right? So now it's a question, where's the breach? Is the breach between the service provider and the operator and the actual logistics provider? Is it between the web shop and the logistics provider? Where's the actual breach? Where is this information obtained to make it more personal? And it's the question of how far do you take personalization? Because if you then obtain data, personalized data of people's without their consent, or obtain too much and then use the personalized, then you get to those, talking about, John Deere tractors for a person to another person for a day, and then starting to see John Deere ads on Facebook.
I was about to say,
how creepy
that's
that
exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens.
Exactly.
Holidays, you talk about a holiday with your wife, and lo and behold, to that destination, it's there. It's, yeah. And again, trust. And the thing is, which organizations do you trust? There are many organizations, including some of the hyperscalers I might have mentioned earlier, who have their own communication solutions, their own chat apps out there, who are offering two-factor authentication via those chat apps. But banks in particular, not just banks, but banks in particular in many countries have come out to say, we will never use or 2FA or get that source that second authentication using a chat app. We will never do that. And they've come out and actively said this. But these services are offered. And there are many other large organizations that have no problem using these chat apps for this two-factor authentication. And if we're talking about the world of SMS, which is has been the central pillar for so long of business to consumer messaging, it really is under sustained attack by so many areas. And I think it was a very smart move, dare I say it, of WhatsApp on June the 1st. They changed their commercial model. So suddenly overnight, in approximately 80% of the countries in the world, it became more cost effective to deliver a two-factor authentication request via WhatsApp than SMS. So there are a lot of challenges out there, but who do you trust? Would you trust this organization over another organization? And the fact is, at the end of the day, mobile network operators are some of the most trusted companies in the world. If you look at Africa, MTN, Mobile Telephone Network, I love that brand name. So MTN is the most trusted brand in Africa, full stop. And you've got mobile operators, and banks tend to be very, very trusted entities too. But who do you trust? That varies. And when it comes to an individual, I as an individual might have no problem whatsoever putting my life on Facebook, sharing my whole holiday, here's me having my food, whatever it might be. I'm not on Facebook, so I'm not that person, but there are many millions of people who do that, share their lives. Yet when it comes to receiving one or two spam messages from a brand they trust and use regularly, they're the first people on the phone to client support saying, why did I receive this message? Because the thing is, if you are sharing so much, you're going to open yourself to having more of these personalized interactions from large scale companies mining that data. And it's a fact of life. Again, it's a personal responsibility. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot be a Hollywood star and expect to walk around the streets of London unrecognized. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
But people want it both
Exactly.
ways, but you can't. And
Of course.
it's unpopular to say that, though, in this day and age.
You,
It's
you want
true.
your cake and you want to eat it too.
Yes.
Everybody
yes.
knows that. You want it. You just, because I want the offers given to me to be the best possible for me, but simultaneously, I don't want you to know anything about me. So, read my mind and don't read my data. It's kind of the idea that we want, but it doesn't work. Cool. Let's take a few quick questions as well. Let's see what else we have. I think we have time for like 2 more, and then we're good. Could you share some practical tips for becoming perceived as trustworthy? Cool. I will draw very practical examples from the business messaging realm, obviously, because that's the realm I'm in. First and foremost, one of the things we've seen that helps trustworthiness quite a lot is homogeny. Is the way you communicate with your customers consistent? Is your brand presence in your text messaging flow, is it consistent? Are you using the same sender ID? Are you using the same domain? Is it always the main domain that people know? Or do you use a lot of derivatives? Do you use bit.ly or tiny URL because you're trying to save a little bit of cost from message length, right? And every single time you do that, and the same time when you go for, below market price sort of offers, you're going to open yourself up to more variation in how that content is delivered, whether it be sender ID, whether it be content manipulation. And if you consistently do that, you use these multiple different methods of delivering that aren't similar across the board, you open yourself up to training your customers to either A, not trust them because you never know what it's going to look like, or B, put them in a position where they will trust any form because it'll be in any form that it could possibly be. Sometimes, and we've all seen this, your Facebook login code comes from a +44 number. Sometimes it comes from Facebook. Sometimes it comes from something third. So it's consistently something different. And now when you train people to never look at where it comes from and just focus on maybe a tiny detail that's like in the content, that is so easy to then manipulate into turning customer behavior on its hair and actually abusing that trust. And once that trust is abused, you're not going to get it back the same way. So from a very practical perspective, keep it very consistent, pure, clean, branded. Protect your brand, protect your sender ID, protect your domain. Make sure that you try to crack down on anybody else using your brand for any nefarious purposes, because it is vital for you to protect it and keep it very clean, very precise. And that's how you build trust from a practical perspective in the long run as well. So consumer behavior is then tailored to focus on that specific aspect. This is what it looks like. If it's ever a deviation from that norm, let's say, you work with DHL, for example, let's just throw a name like that out there, something that everybody knows. You get a DHL notification, and if for the past 5 years it has always looked exactly the same, and then you get a different one, you're immediately going to go, even in the thread, you sort of go, but why isn't this there? Why is it different? This isn't what I'm used to. And you're immediately more suspicious, so you're a lot less susceptible to that type of fraud as well. But if it's different and it's coming from who knows what sender ID every single time you get a parcel, you'll immediately be more susceptible to the scam as well. So for me, one of the most practical things to do is make sure you have consistent understanding of how to do things and have consistency in your messaging as well.
That's why I use that word consistency all the time, personally, in work, outside of work. Consistency is key. But the thing is, the problem is with consistency, it can't be done overnight. So let's say you and I set up a messaging company now together ourselves straight away. We do that ourselves. I'm known, you're known in the industry. So yes, we've got our own people who know us, people know you, but enterprises out there don't know us, potentially. So how can they trust us? We're going up against organizations who've been out there for 10, 15, some of them 20 years, who have built up that trusted position, who have got that ISO 27001, who have signed up to the MEF Business SMS Code of Conduct. Okay, we do that. We get the Code of Conduct. We sign up to 27001. We do all of that very, very rapidly. once we start the business. But trust comes over time. So we can only build that trust by getting our first client on board, doing a great job, and then through word of mouth, those customers go, wow, these guys, James and Uku, are really, really trustworthy. We can trust that and go forward. And I've got to say, though, for me, the acid test of trustworthiness and also, is that provider really any good, is actually if something goes wrong. Because I do not expect a provider to be perfect 100% of the time. And indeed, even like that relationship I've got with American Express over 23 years, I've had 2 times when things have gone wrong. And those have ended up costing me money. Not a vast amount of money, but they've ended up costing me. But in 23 years, twice. And actually, how they dealt with it was AAA, Mint. It was amazing how they actually dealt with it at the back end. So trust, it's not about always being perfect, but it's about how you respond also when things go wrong. You don't bury your head in the sand. You don't ignore. You don't blame the end user and instantly, even though it might not be them. It's how you react. And that is something, unfortunately, which only comes with time. So it's a tough gig to get out there, to set up a brand new business and to win that trust overnight. Unfortunately, it can't be done overnight. You can do everything you can to accelerate the process, but it does take time.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that. Okay, let's take the last one for today. You mentioned the code of conduct. Can you elaborate a bit on the upcoming updates coming to the code of conduct? Well, this is all you, James.
Yeah, no problem. So we've got the business SMS code of conduct. I mentioned it's been signed by approximately 50 companies. It is the most detailed out there amongst any other trade association, but it's not bulletproof now. Things have moved on. We're at the current version 2 of the code of conduct. And when the code was put together, it was put together by members. It took over a year for members to come up with the text of the code of conduct, but then it took over another year to actually get that iteration of the code of conduct through the lawyers, through the legal teams of the members at that time. And then when it came to revisiting the code, it took over a year as well, a few years after. And it was actually the second week I joined MEF. So right at the end of 2020, the beginning of 2021 was when version 2 of the code came out. Unfortunately, the world of fraud has moved on. You mentioned something called AIT, the artificial inflation of traffic. This is quite simply where some very smart people increasingly employing the likes of artificial intelligence and bots to create fake subscribers. So you and I think we're doing a wonderful job. We've suddenly increased our subscriber base by 50% within a week. We're going great guns with our startup, but in fact, they're fake subscribers set up to purely generate and initiate as many of these authentication messages as possible, and then to collect at the back end somehow a portion of the revenue. So that fraud directly impacts enterprises. And for the first time in the business messaging world with SMS, enterprises are in the crosshairs. And it's very, very difficult for an enterprise to go, it wasn't me when they received the bill from the likes of you. And to go back through the chain, it's a real difficult fraud to do. But in the new iteration of the code of conduct, which our members are starting work on, there's going to be far more mention of AIT there and a general tightening up of the language. So there's no doubt out there that, of course, spam, this SMS phishing, as you talked about with the great example of the logistics company and the parcel locker, they're important. They've been around for years. Unfortunately, those types of fraud attempts are going to be around, even in other channels. No, we haven't talked about other channels as well. So chat apps are not perfect either in any way, shape or form. Indeed, in some countries like India, the chat apps, spam, fraud attempts are rife in the chat apps as well. So please don't just hang the bad things around the neck of SMS. But this rework of the code of conduct is going to take a lot of time. I'm pleased to say you're a very active contributor and you're contributing to it as well. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we've talked so much about AIT and the ramifications that it has for businesses, for the trust of the channel, et cetera, that, it would be a shame to not work on the next iteration of the code of conduct, having already signed the previous one, but definitely looking forward to making the new one as effective as possible. And I think that one of the things that I'm really, really looking forward to is when that new code of conduct is out, are there going to be any red button pushers? Like, will that moment actually happen when somebody's called out? Because I think it requires that first initial push, that first button push to actually push the industry in a better direction as well. But who has, one, the
It's
courage, and second, the actual ability to push it and improve that it's true what they're saying.
because, as I said, as I mentioned, no one is perfect, and
Yeah.
it doesn't take you too long to find certain brands out there who have been found out doing things. But again, a lot of it hasn't been systematic. It has not been systematic. It's because by accident certain traffic was allowed through, because many of these guys are dealing with millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of transactions ultimately a day. So it's an interesting one. And yes, that red button is there to be pressed, but let's see what happens.
Exactly. Well, we've talked for a long time again, as is usual whenever we actually get on the way. A lot of good insights to talk about as well. We'll probably have to do session 2 up till 16 at this point in time with you. But I'd like to just say thank you. Thank you for joining. Thank you for talking about the trust survey and all of the issues surrounding trust and what the future might potentially look like. I hope you had a good time as well.
I did. I really enjoyed it. Thank you again for inviting me. And it's a topic I never get tired of, because this is something we've got to work at. It will never fix this. I'm sorry to say it. This will never be 100% perfect. This is ongoing for as long as business messaging is around in all its various forms. So that's forever. But it's something we've got to do more on. So thank you, Uku.
Fully agree. Fully agreed. Thank you, James. Thank you to everybody listening and everybody who actually sent questions in as well. Very nice questions again. And I'll see you at the next Messaging Maven, I guess, in a fair bit of time. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.